cats and kittens. It's your Commissioner Tim back at you with the Week 3 recap, Week 4 previews, and our favorite section of the all, the power rankings after the first 3 weeks of the seasons. Man, Week 3 was fun. Tons of upsets in the NFL. We have Broncos over the Bucks, Panthers over the Raiders, Rams over the Niners. Sorry, Kevin and John. Commanders over the Bengals, and even the battle of the undefeated 3-0 teams. I thought the Steelers, or 2-0 teams, I thought the Steelers over Chargers was pretty exciting as well. And we got some upsets in CCK too. So let's not take any further time. Head straight into the matchup reviews of Week 3. Bills Mafia versus Two Shots No Cup. Eve, our boy, does it. Pulls off the biggest upsets in CCK history. What a savvy pickup by Eve on Andy Dalton. I don't think anyone had him scoring 24 points this week, but between him and Jaden Daniels, shining. Eve really won this. Yeah, Brandon has to be disappointed with his output versus projections, but this was really Eve winning it rather than Brandon losing it. Eve scored the 4th highest points for in the league this week, and if we were playing against the median, Eve had his first 2-win week season since his painful rebuild started last season. It's also great to see Eve so active in the waivers. That activity is actually what got him the win this week, on top of the aforementioned Andy Dalton, Carson Steele, and Jalen Naylor. Both players he's picked up on waivers this season contributed on the win. So you figure Eve has got to be in a position for a much more competitive season this year. I don't know how long Andy Dalton stays relevant, but I think he has a bona fide QB1, franchise, cornerstone in Jaden Daniels too. And Quentin Johnson also playing a much better season his sophomore year compared to his abysmal rookie season. And Eve, our boy, has accruing assets on his roster for the first time since the rebuild. So congratulations, Eve. You now move up into the column at 1 and 2, and Bills Mafia falls to 1 and 2 with the losing record. Surprising slow start for Brandon. All right. So speaking of upsets, this to me was almost just as big of an upset as Eve over Brandon. 41-point outing by Juwan Jennings was enough to beat the perennial contender in the league in Ryan Bradyster Dynasty. I also would have figured it would have been Ryan's Brandon Ayuk and not Juwan Jennings of all people with that crazy output. But here we are. Devin Singletary has also been playing really nice for the Giants offense, who out of nowhere seems like a capable offense. So Kevin is really reaping the benefits. And hey, 120 this season, especially with how slow a lot of teams have started, nothing to scoff at. That's the 3rd highest in the league in terms of output. So with this, Kevin now moves up to a winning record at 2-1. And with this matchup we'll talk about in Week 4 preview section, I think there's a massive chance for Kevin to sneak into the playoffs this year. All right, so moving over to matchup number 3. This one ended up being a blowout as expected, but through the morning window games, it looked like a pretty competitive matchup. Lamar and Dak, obviously in the afternoon windows, had their biggest weeks this season at the same time, and Kyle ran away with it behind the league's RB1 and RB3 of the season in Saquon Barkley and Kyren Williams. If I'm Brad, though, I gotta be feeling pretty good about the progression Caleb Williams showed in Week 3. He's still very wild with it. He had 2 interceptions and 1 lost fumble. But I think he's suffering from horrible coaching behind Shane Waldron and Matt Eberflus. But in a year where there's only been a handful of 300-yard plus passing games by any quarterback, Caleb Williams throwing for 363. It's got to be feeling pretty good. Aaron Rodgers also looked like prime Aaron Rodgers, Packers Rodgers on Thursday Night Football in their blowout win against the Pats. And Bucky Irving, also on Brad's team, looks like I think he's going to end up as the RB1 for the Bucs by midseason, based on the progression of the snap share that he's recorded since Week 1, and also the output. So I think Brad is actually just a good Jacksonville offense away from being competitive, much more competitive on a week-to-week basis than he was last season, especially with how Brian Thomas on that Jacksonville offense has been playing. All right, moving over to the 4th matchup. This wasn't a close matchup. My team's been hitting on all cylinders to start the season, posting no less than 140 through all 3 weeks so far, and no less than the 2nd highest in the league each week. This week, finishing as the top scorer. I'm thrilled with how Malik Neighbors has been performing this season. He's actually the wide receiver one in the league through 3 weeks, and surprising performances behind Kyler Murray and Justin Fields. I feel like I'm a good Falcons offense away from really getting to my own tier, as it will boost Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Now, for Sergey, he's got to be thrilled with how Bo Nix played and how he looked in their upset victory over the Bucks. I also completely underestimated Bo's legs. He's averaging 35 yards on the ground and has 2 rushing touchdowns through the first 3 weeks of the season. And man, how good does Rashee Rice look? He's the clear wide receiver one for Pat Mahomes, and I think there's only 6 wide receivers in our dynasty format I'd rather have than Rashee Rice right now. And Rashee Rice, by the way, was the 13th pick in the draft last season. And I always mention that I think Sergey drafts the best out of all of us in CCK. And speaking of the draft, this year's 107 pick by Sergey and Rome Odunze finally had his big game, going for 112 yards and a tutty. And most importantly, led to targets for Caleb Williams. And it looked like Caleb was targeting Rome in almost every third down opportunity in critical downs. And that chemistry between the two will only continue to grow as well. So if I'm Sergey, I'm feeling very happy about my young studs and the rising assets that I have. And like I said, I think Sergey is definitely in play for the playoffs this season. All right, moving over to the last matchup from last week, which was my commissioner pick of the week. I'm going to speak a little bit much longer on this section. I picked this as the commissioner's matchup of the week solely because of the critical early season playoff implications. Now, John ends up falling to 0-3, now as the only winless team in the league. And Travis moves up to a winning column, sitting at 2-1. So this vaulted Travis's chances of making the playoffs quite a bit, as you'll see in the power rankings. And John is still likely to make the playoffs, even while he's sitting 0-3. But now sitting 2 games behind the 6th seed with unexpected risers in our league puts John in a pretty tough and tight scenario. I think he thankfully faces the easiest matchup of the schedule this season against Cup to Canada. No shots, no cup this week, but we just saw Eve putting up over 120, which is a mark that John has yet to cross this season. So needless to say, this week 4 matchup upcoming for John is absolutely a must win. Staying on John for another comment, entering last season, not this one, last season, I said John's team will go as far as Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert will take him. Am I the only one who thinks Trevor Lawrence may never figure it out? Forget his stat line. He's playing horribly. You don't want to see a regression in a dude that just got paid $275 million contract extension and $200 million guaranteed. And while I'm a Justin Herbert fan, I fear him running Jim Harbaugh's offense, run-heavy offense, and also him dealing with that high ankle sprain injury again that he suffered in week 2, re-aggravated in week 3, which put him out of the game. I think both of those things might lead Justin Herbert to have another injury-riddled, sort of disappointing type of season like he did last season. But outside of those QBs and obviously Travis Kelce, which we'll talk about in a little bit in the next section, if Trevor Lawrence figures it out, I think even at 0-3, John is a shoo-in for the playoffs with the roster construction, just because the rest of his team is performing. We're seeing Derrick Henry's resurgence for that Baltimore offense, and David Montgomery stays to continue to stay relevant. Amon-Ra St. Brown now obviously looking like the wide receiver one for the Lions that he should be. But all that said, Trevor Lawrence needs to figure it out for John to be a shoo-in for the playoffs. And to me, right now, that's an absolute big if. Now, over to Travis. Travis has a playoff roster, and I think he's improved from last season as well. He'll go as far as Joe Burrow, Jordan Love, and James Cook will take him. And I think all 3 of those players have a chance to finish top 5 in their positions as well. And if you squint hard enough, I think you can see paths for other high-end performances from players like Chris Olave, Deontay Johnson, Joe Mixon, Terry McLaurin, and TJ Hawkinson when he comes back from the IR. And now sitting at 2-1, I was doubting Travis's chances of making the playoffs last week, but now I see him firmly taking the 5th seed. All right, so we've been through 3 weeks now, which means there's been enough data points to feel like there has been hyped up stories that came crumbling down this week, and players who look like we need to upgrade their tiers moving forward. There's players who soared through the first 2 weeks and came too close to the sun and came burning down in week 3 like Icarus. And there's players who continue to soar and are nearing ascension and immortality, like Hercules. And there's also some players who's probably dead or missing, like Hades taking their souls. We'll dive into this section with each position highlighted. So Icarus, welcome back to Earth. Players that just came crumbling down from their high hopes that they showed and displayed in the first 2 weeks of the season. I just want to say the Saints passing offense, Derek Carr and obviously Rashid Shaheed, who put up a donut. Derek Carr was averaging 21 points for the first 2 weeks as a QB4, puts up 8 points. Rashid Shaheed was a wide receiver 7, averaging 17 points, puts up a donut. Baker Mayfield, 24.5. He was a QB1 heading into week 3, puts up just 9 points. J.K. Dobbins, RB3, averaging 20.5 heading into this week, puts up 7 in a disappointing, obviously, injury. That second half was really nothing good, but the first half also, he didn't really look that great. James Conner, who was the RB6 heading into the week, puts up just 3 points. Ramondre Stevens, who I talked a lot positively about in last week's video, obviously Thursday Night Football, puts up 0.3. And Jameson Williams certainly takes a back seat now. It's going to be a very boom bust. I think a faster, more athletic, this generation's Tyler Lockett of sorts. He was averaging 16.8 heading into the week as wide receiver 6. Only gets 1 reception and goes for 0.7 points. Now, on brighter notes, there's been a lot of players who's continued to ascend. And by the way, I'm not going to be mentioning any players on the Miami offense, given it's an indirect reason associated with Tua. Obviously, Tyreek Hill's been disappointment, Jalen Waddle as well, Devin Achane in week 3, as well as parts of week 2 since the injury. Obviously, didn't look like himself. And I think those are going to be all figuring itself out once Tua comes back, if he comes back. All right, so now moving over to players who are nearing ascension into immortality. These are players who continue to put up really high-performing weeks their first 3 weeks, and I think these are the players that we got to upgrade in our tiers. We got QBs, Jaden Daniels. He's QB2 right now and put up 28.1 points this week. Sam Darnold, QB4, put up 23.2. Kyler Murray, QB5, who put up 14.8. And Justin Fields, he's not necessarily a riser, but I would have said that he's probably had a chance to be a perennial backup. But he looks like he's taking the starting position away from Russell Wilson, starting the Steelers off at 3-0. So hopefully that player on my bench is going to be a rising asset, and hopefully Mike Tomlin really allows him to deal a little bit more. Now, moving over to RBs, man, you got the top 5 RBs here. They're all Hercules. We got Saquon Barkley taking his RB1 spot that we haven't seen his performance since his rookie year, put up 31 points this week. Alvin Kamara, who's just been a stud, RB2, puts up a respectable 14. Kyren Williams, RB3, puts up 30 plus. Derrick Henry, resurgence, RB4, puts up almost 30 points. And James Cook has been steady Eddie, RB5, putting up consistent numbers around that 15 to 20 mark. I think all of these players have a really, really good shot at remaining in the top 5 as well. Certainly, I don't see any of these players dropping out of the top 7, top 8 rest of the season. I think all of these players, if you're a manager that owns and rosters these players, you got to be feeling really, really good about yourself. All right, moving over to the other positions, we got wide receivers and Malik Neighbors, who's the wide receiver 1 in the entire league, like I said, through his first 3 weeks in the league, puts up 24 points this week. Chris Godwin, he's wide receiver 3 right now, puts up a respectable 14. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 4, puts up 23 as wide receiver 1 for Pat Mahomes. And Marvin Harrison, after that dud week in first week of his season, where he went, I think, 1 reception for 4 yards, 0.9 points. He's now averaging 21 points in week 2 and week 3, and just put up 14.9 with a tutty again. He's now wide receiver 9. So those players, I think we got to all upgrade for the rest of the season. Certainly, given that the names are quite young in Malik Neighbors, Rashee Rice, and Marvin Harrison, we've got to be moving them up a tier, in my opinion. Like I said, Malik Neighbors to me looks like a Wi-Fi bona fide wide receiver top 5 along with Marvin Harrison in terms of dynasty rankings. And Rashee Rice, I can't name more than 6 players at the wide receiver position I would rather have than Rashee Rice. And in terms of tight ends, it's been a horrific season. And I'll talk about this in the Hades section after this. But man, Brock Bowers, I'll put him in here because it actually was a dud week for him, going only for 5.6. But he's had tremendous first 2 weeks, and if that's his floor at 5.6 for how the rest of the tight ends this season are performing, that's hell of a play. And Brock Bowers, I called it last week that I thought by mid-season he's going to be the bona fide stud, unanimous consensus tight end number one. I think he's got to be there already for everyone. All right, moving over to this section. Are they taken by Hades? You're either dead after week 3 or you're continue to be missing, and who knows if we'll ever see them. Dead, I think, is obvious. Bryce Young, don't really need to talk about it, but I don't think Andy Dalton going off and bringing a W against the Raiders and putting up 24.6 fantasy points, putting up over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. I believe the first performance of 300 yards and 3 touchdown performance this entire season by any quarterback. With the same exact offense, and they just look rejuvenated. And it's never a good thing when you see a 36-year-old vet who isn't expected to take the starting reps at all, rejuvenating an offense after just 2 weeks. So I don't know if Bryce Young is going to have a chapter left in the Panthers picture. Again, that said, this could be a 1-week boost kind of thing. Who knows? We'll have to see. But certainly, I think Bryce Young has got to be the biggest loser of the season so far. And now I'll also say a less relevant fantasy player in Russell Wilson. I think he's not going to see the field for the Steelers this season unless something horrific happens to Justin Fields or he loses 3 straight, for example. But for now, I think those 2 players are good as dead for this fantasy relevancy for the season. Now, missing. I want to start off with the tight ends. I think we might have a shifting of the guards right now at the tight end position, but we also don't really have any stud tight ends because names like Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, all these types of players that we were expecting a lot of this season coming into their sophomore seasons and their third seasons, we're just not really seeing much. So I don't know if the changing of guards is happening outside of the earlier mentioned Brock Bowers, but Travis Kelce is the tight end 24. Do you realize how bad you have to be playing to be ranked the 24th tight end in fantasy? And Mark Andrews is literally the worst tight end in terms of starters at tight end 32 right now. And while Isaiah Likely, I believe, is tight end 6 as well. So, man, the reality came crashing down hard on these players who's had excellent long careers, and maybe they're just over the hill, and no one really thought it would have regressed this quickly. And the other names, Brandon Ayuk, Michael Pittman, those are all wide receivers. Now, Michael Pittman I can explain because of Anthony Richardson, but Brandon Ayuk, I don't know what's going on. It was Juwan Jennings' show in week 3, and Brandon Ayuk got the extension that he wanted. Maybe that whole distraction over the offseason is what really is causing his slow buildup. But in a week where you had no Debo and in a week where you had no George Kittle, you'd figure, and obviously no CMC, you'd figure it'd be Brandon Ayuk who can actually, light up and show what he is. And haven't seen that this season. And I'm sure Ayuk's going to turn it around, but I think Brandon did a good job of trading Ayuk away earlier this season amongst all the news. Now, over to RBs as well. DeAndre Swift, RB 42, he literally hasn't done anything. I think there's a good chance that he loses that backfield completely. It's a running back by committee. There really isn't any player that's performing that well over him, but maybe they'll just continue to give him a chance to see how he looks once the offense actually gets settling with Caleb running it, but just has not been performing well. I think he's averaging like 2-3 yards a pop right now. Javonte Williams, RB 45, same thing could be said about him. Now, QBs, obviously big names here. It is crazy to me that Patrick Mahomes, through 3 weeks, is the QB 14 in the league. He's been sloppy. There's obviously not as much air throws or air yards that he's putting up either. He's obviously not targeting Travis Kelce either. I believe he had 12 targets over to Rashee Rice this week 3. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. He's GOAT. So he's going to absolutely turn it around, but maybe it's a scheme change. Maybe I don't know what it is, but maybe his ceiling isn't a QB1 anymore. Now, Anthony Richardson, that guy should be able to be a good fantasy player if he's able to put up more ground game, but he's also not really been able to show that this season either. He's QB20 and he's making less than 50% of completions right now in terms of his completion rate. I mean, there's a good chance Anthony Richardson might be out of the league in 2 years. So hopefully he's going to be able to turn it around. I believe in the coaching over there for the Colts and the organization at large. And he's got a lot of weapons around him. He's got decent weapons around him in Michael Pittman there. But really, it's Alec Pierce that's been the only one that's really targeted. And And Jonathan Taylor is doing really, really well on the ground, but he's not getting work on the receptions either. So other big names, a little bit older, but Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, they're also rusty. They're not performing. Now, I don't know if all this trend of the preseason work not necessarily having any of these players really start is really, in fact, causing a lot of these slow starts for a lot of these vets. But obviously, Kirk is coming off of a pretty tremendous, horribly injury with his Achilles, and he's starting to look a little bit more active and mobile. I'm watching a lot of snaps for the Falcons, just given my exposure to the offense over there, but he's looking better. Hopefully, Kirk Cousins is going to be able to turn it around. And I'm sure Jared Goff will too, but these guys are missing for sure. And Trevor Lawrence, I won't beat the dead horse there. He just has not been playing really, really well. He's QB 29 for the season. All right, so that does it for this fun news section, and we're going to move over to the Week 4 matchup previews. All right, starting off the first one, we got Full Jerry, who's sitting at 0-3, going to be two shots no cup at 1-2, who just won his first game, put up the first 120 plus points. Sleeper's got this going 63% Full Jerry's way. I'm not going to argue with it there. I think John gets finally into the winning column. He's going to be sitting at 1-3. Eve's going to drop to 1-3, and Full Jerry is going to start that chase to playoff for that 6th seed after this week. Huge Dicka against Moncton Meerkats. Sleeper's got this going 62% over to Kyle. I'm not going to disagree. I think Kyle's going to stay and maintain his perfect record, the only perfect record of the season, going 4-0 here. Huge Dicka should drop to 2-2. Third matchup, we got Brady Sir Dynasty favored obnoxiously high over Wooksy Fingerhold at 73-27. I'm not going to argue with it either. I think Brady Sir Dynasty is coming off of a pretty tremendously horrible loss against Kevin here, but I think he picks it up, goes back on the winning way, sitting at 3-1. All right, I've got Kevin and Mr. Ambassador as the fourth matchup of the week here. Kevin's actually sitting at 2-1. Sorry for the typo here. Mr. Ambassador sitting at 1-2. Sleeper's got this 51 to Mr. Ambassador 49, so obviously a tight matchup. But I've got Kevin winning this one, and it's solely for the excitement of what this would mean if Kevin wins for the 6th seed. I see Kevin's chances of making the playoffs skyrocket if he advances to 3-1 versus Sergey's impact of making the playoffs if he goes up to 2-2 versus him sitting at 1-3. That said, if there is to be a sneak in unexpected playoff manager, it's going to be one of these two. All right, moving over to the matchup of the week. It's a commissioner pick of the week. Now, I've got Trusted Process against Bills Mafia here. Trusted Process sitting at 2-1, 1-2 in a row. Bills Mafia lost 2 in a row. This, to me, is the matchup of the week because Brandon's team's elite, but they're not performing like it. He will need either both of his QBs to be performing to their level of expectations, or his wide receivers should be performing. But with Mahomes and Hurts both not really performing, at least to their high expectations, and with Tua's injury, both Tyreek and Jalen Waddle being pretty irrelevant, that's too much of a gap, and I'm sticking with Sleeper's pick and going with me taking the win over Bills Mafia and moving up to 3-1. And now let's move over to the power rankings. We've got some movements at the top. I'm moving Moncton Meerkats, who's the only team sitting perfect at 3-0, to the 1 spot. Trust this process moves up 1 as well. Bracer Dynasty drops 2 with the pretty bad loss there, and Bills Mafia stays at the 4 spot. No movements there except Kevin moves up a spot over Mr. Ambassador. Now, just like last week between the 5th and 6th seed, that matchup between Full Jerry and Ujica would have made a lot of changes to the playoff implications that you see right here. It's going to be the same thing here between Kevin and Mr. Ambassador for this week. So on the right, you've got the playoff percentages as of Fantasy Pros. Fantasy Pros has Moncton Meerkat, Trusted Process, and Bracer Dynasty as locks. And Bills Mafia is a lock as well, 99%. I personally wouldn't put it at 99%. Who knows, especially after this week, if Brandon drops to 1-3. That said, if you look at Huge Dicka, with that win over Full Jerry, he's at 85% now. It's a big boon for him. I believe it would have been closer to 50-50 between Huge Dicka and Full Jerry had Full Jerry won. But Kevin, with that win over Bracer Dynasty, goes from, I believe, 11%, 10% up to, and skyrockets to 42%. And if he's able to pull off the victory against Mr. Ambassador, I believe that's going to put him over the 50% mark, as he's going to be sitting at 3-1. And certainly even higher, depending on what happens to Full Jerry in this matchup against Two Shots No Cup. But that's how Fantasy Pros has it. And that's relatively how my power rankings is also done. And points for is also somewhat reflected. Obviously, the one thing to really point out, there's a clear tier. Top three is in a tier, but really the 4 through the 8 seed, it's really anyone's game. Now, the lowest score in points for versus the highest, which is Bills Mafia against Kevin, that gap of uh, 53 points is actually less than the gap between the first and third. So fourth and eighth teams are right now, at least through 3 weeks, are really bunched at the top. And I'm excited for what this could mean because this is likely going to mean a lot of actions heading into trade deadlines. I believe it's week 8. So really excited for what this kind of season start looks like for the activity in our league. So can't be more excited. And that does it for this week's recap, previews, and the power rankings. Enjoy Thursday night football, Sunday games, and the Monday night football game as well, boys. Enjoy week 4. Good luck and peace.